Talofa lava, kia ora, and warm Pacific greetings to you all. For more than 130 years, we've been cultivating, processing, exporting, eating, and drinking cacao in the Pacific. We have a unique blend of varieties, or a mix of cacao strains that vary from farm to farm, island to island, and with some of the unique fine flavor that can only be found in the Pacific. Cacao Conversations is a casual podcast where we talk to some of the Pacific's most passionate cacao or cocoa people. My first guest is Grant Vinning from Brisbane, and Grant is an international marketing expert who has been working with cocoa in the Pacific and in Asia for more than 10 years. He's also the author of Cocoa in the Pacific, the First 50 Years, and we look forward to his next edition for the next 50 years. Grant is also one of the judges in our Pacific Cacao and Chocolate 2022 show. So today we are talking to him about his work with cocoa and cocoa farmers in the Pacific. Welcome to Cacao Conversations, Grant.
Stop that.
What I really wanted to chat about today was your journey with cacao and cocoa. Now, I understand that you use the word cocoa, so you can take it away from there. Why cocoa? And then tell me.
It's interesting you should raise that, because at one stage there was a big debate. Was there a difference between pawpaw and papaya? It's exactly the same thing. It's just the way different people pronounce it. Same as cocoa and cacao. But I grew up on cocoa, so we'll call it cocoa. To answer your question, it actually started in Solomon Islands. And I was working with a magnificent man called Moses Pilomo. And we had this particular report that actually stated there was a 25% gap between the price that New Guinea got and the price that the Solomons got. And I thought, this is a bit strange. Anyway, I've known Moses for a long time. So Moses said to me, what can you do about it? So I went to Singapore and I got hold of the really original Singapore statistics. And it's an interesting thing for it. Statistics don't lie. They're just manipulated.
Yeah.
The data that we got was absolutely, totally true. There was a 25% gap between what New Guinea got and what the Solomon Islands got. But when you looked at something like 25 observations, that was the only time that New Guinea got a gap of that big. And so ever since then, I've become intrigued with regard to cocoa. But it actually started with Moses in the Solomon Islands. So that's at least 10 odd years ago. We had a project there called CLIP, Cocoa Livelihood Improvement Program. And we did a lot of things there. And again, for us, what it did was it told us there's no single answer to going about this thing. I mean, partly it's technology. Have you got the right varieties? Partly it's fermenting and drying. Have you got that right?
Yes.
Partly it's the prices. So you just can't say if we improve varieties or if we get a better genetics, that'll solve the problem. No, it won't. You've got to look at the whole of the situation, all the three things. Yes. And in the value chain terms for us, you've got three arms. You've got production, you've got marketing, and you've got the bit in the middle. And the bit in the middle is the part which is the most money is made the most quickest. It's the place where you can do the greatest change quickly. Come back to production. To change production on a farm is a long, slow process. And for example, with genetics, everyone says it's all about genetics. But some recent tasting done in New Guinea, no more than 3 weeks ago, genetics will only contribute about 10% to the final end product. So you can do a lot of work on the farm, but increases there are very slow and take a long time to come to. At the other end is marketing. And to try and change marketing prices takes a lot. But the bit in the middle is where the quickest, fastest can be made. Critically, fermentation and drying.
Yeah.
To me, they're the fundamental key. Your fermentation and drying has to be spot on in order to bring out that 10% of what genetics can give to you. So to me, the bit in the middle, which is fermentation and drying, But then not just that, Floris. You've got to think of then how do you store it? Because you can't send out a bag at a time. You've got to have bags stored in order to make a container to go into a ship.
It's a huge
so again, therefore you have proper storage. Do you have it on pallets, on concrete floor, or what? How much aeration have you got going through the facility type of thing?
Yeah.
Then the next part, again in that what I call the bit in the middle, is the containers. And when we started in the Solomons, let's be frank, we're a small island at the end of everywhere.
Yeah.
We got sent the worst containers you could possibly imagine. And they kind of felt we wouldn't know any bloody difference, so what the hell. What we did, though, would we then get ourselves put inside the container, shut the door on the container.
Yeah.
And if we saw any light whatsoever, we rejected the container.
Yeah.
Because in that light could come moisture.
Yes.
And moisture's a killer. So the three things that were the most important, or four things that's the most important with regard to the bit in the middle: fermentation, drying, storage before shipping, and then the actual shipping, the shipping container and stuff like that. The other bits are important. I'm not denying the role of production. I'm not denying the role of marketing. But the quickest, fastest, easiest place to make an impact is that bit in the middle. And I just found that interesting to do.
Wow, that's really amazing. And I think that's, as a farmer, that's the bit in the middle where you're talking about. That is the hardest part for us if we're wanting to get it across to the other side, because you could have pristine fermentation and dry, and then by the time I sometimes have to put it into suitcases and fly it with me, just so that I know that they're going to be safe and that they're going to be,
Well, just on that, I've done a series of presentations recently on what they call micro-lot selling, and I'd be quite happy to do the presentation with you people again. But in there, I make the point that as far as you're concerned, the most important person in your life is not your partner, it's not your children, it's the freight forwarder. Freight forwarder is really, really important because, quite frankly, if you're selling, I'll take this as an example, you're selling beans from Samoa into England. Now, you can't be expected to know what's the best connection down into Auckland or back up to Science or over to Solomon Island or over to Samoa. You don't know it. That's what a freight forwarder does.
Yeah.
And so, to me, one of the core assets you need to have a successful industry is a good body of freight forwarders you can call upon to help. Now, the other person who is, unfortunately, Floris, they are always associated with evil, is the bloke in the middle. He has different names: middleman, aggregator, consolidator, warehouse builder.
Yes.
Without them, you can't do it. And yet somehow, I'm going to be quite critical, academics, politicians and public servants always seem to think that the middleman is an evil person because he makes profit. Well, big deal. How else is he going to operate? But he's the one that aggregates the cargo, puts it together. Yeah. And so the two most important people in a grower's life really turn out to be the freight forwarder and the aggregator, consolidator, middleman, whatever word you want to use for that. They're the ones who really make the most. Now, yes, the aggregator, middleman, consolidator makes a profit. But how many growers do you know that reckon, I can make that profit, why should I use him? And next week they go broke.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a real skill. It's a major skill. And they're the ones, as you're growing your cocoa and all that stuff, learn to love the various freight forwarders in downtown Samoa. Learn to love who are the aggregators, people like that. They're terribly important.
It's all about building relationships with these people. And I think it's very challenging in the Pacific. And I'm sure you already know that, sometimes you have a consistent freight forwarder, shipping company, you have a consistent, staff changes, things happen. Like, for example, COVID now, everything's thrown up in the air. I heard about somebody's container that's been sitting on the wall for like 5 or 6 months now. And it's just really, really tough because they don't know, they've already paid for the beans, but they don't know if it's going to be any use by the time they get it out. So, so many challenges.
There's another trap in that one. There's another trap.
Yeah.
I've since been told by some people that shipping companies will no longer do less than container loads. So even if you only put 2 tons in a container, you've got to be charged at the fully container load.
Full container.
Because, if it's an LC or less than container load, and I'll make this up now, you're sending a shipment into Brisbane. So you drop off 10 bags in Brisbane, then it goes down to Sydney, and you drop off 20 bags down there, and you go down to Melbourne. No, not anymore. You've got to drop all the beans off at the one place. So you wind up putting less than economic volumes into a container, because the shipping companies will not handle this what break cargo or LC or less than fully loaded containers. And so these are terms, Floris, which growers aren't familiar with. An FCL versus an LC, a fully loaded container versus a less than fully loaded container. Strictly speaking, an LCL is the best one economically, because someone else has the container and you hire space in that container, so it's cheaper. But you have no say over when that container sails. It's the person who's hired the container. So sometimes you're waiting for that person to have to fill up the container, because he's hired the container. He can do what he wants to. And if you've got your documentation or your bill paying is based upon the moment the ship sails or the moment the ship lands, something like that, that delay can have considerable implication for your cash flow. So at the end of the day, you can see we're moving more and more away from the implications of the production type thing. Now, the variety, the genetics and all that stuff, into this is where you make your money. This is where you lose your money as well as make your money.
We're just trying to fight fires in different places then.
And again, though, this is why I think that a good freight forwarder is critical. And I don't know how many you've got in Samoa. In Bougainville, for example, we don't have very many freight forwarders. But in Lae, because Lae tends to be the port handling all the stuff going up into the highlands and that, Lae's got a cadre of freight forwarders. And they're the ones you should fall in love with, because they're the ones that are very important to your life.
Excellent. So out of the countries in the Pacific that you've worked with in terms of this whole process, which of the islands has got it, that they've
No, the one I admire the most is Vanuatu, and I've got to be a bit careful about commercial secret. They deal with a chocolate maker in Australia.
Sure.
And they've got a good relationship. The chocolate maker goes over there fairly frequently. I don't think at this stage that any of that team have come into Australia, but they've got a good relationship going. And the chocolate maker in Australia pays well over the world price, because he's getting what he wants to. And he's actually paid a bloke over in Vanuatu to be like the coordinator, making sure that all the load comes down to the main port and is shipped away. But coming back a little bit, there was also a really good relationship for a long time, and I can mention the names now because it's someone on my lips. In the Solomon Islands, there was Solcom. It was a grower group that came together under Andrew Saleh, who I introduced you to.
Yes.
And with a chocolate maker in Sydney. Now, it really worked both ways. The chocolate maker in Sydney would go over to the Solomons and have a look. At one stage, we organised, when I was there, 2 people from the Solomons to come and work in the factory in Sydney. And,
awesome.
and everyone said, misuse of Pacific labour. Bloody rubbish. What happened was the guys who came over then understood that if Dean said about something about fermentation or too dry or too wet or something, they knew exactly what was going on. But it was also a good relationship. He not only bought their beans and gave a very good price for it, but also, I remember one stage when Dean was over there, he told them how to set the fire in a fire drying facility. Even though we all know about should have solar or sun, every now and again you can't do that. But Dean would actually show you how to lay the fire within there so that you didn't get this type of a problem. And it was a really good relationship. But this tends to be individualised rather than as a whole of a group. There's a group in Bougainville I work with a chocolate maker in Canberra, and this really has an admirable relationship. It didn't start off well when they first started, they did the sample and all that type of stuff. That was really cool. When they decided to go ahead in business, the Bougainvillean was a bit short. So he got some other beans here and there. And those other beans ruined the rest of the container.
Yeah.
And the buyer in Australia said, no, Maskey, we're not paying for any of this. It was a vital lesson at the very beginning of the relationship. Ever since then, everything's gone swimmingly. The buyer is prepared to give way because shipping doesn't come on time or they had a wet harvest. Pick a reason. He understands. So even though there was a contract, that there was an understanding because in turn the grower understood what they were doing down there, and so he also adapted, adjusted, amended, all that type of stuff. So it's not just about straight out money.
No.
Most small chocolate makers that I'm aware of pay well over the world price to get what they want. They're quite happy to pay that extra price, but by God, you've got to give them what they want.
Exactly.
It's a trade-off.
I've experienced that myself, so definitely I could vouch for that. So you've done so much work, over 10 years worth of work in the Pacific. It's very admirable, of course. And then you wrote Cocoa in the Pacific. Now, it seemed likely that it would, it would happen, that you would write about the work that you're doing in the Pacific.
That was interesting. I understand the importance of genetics. And now we needed to know, where did the beans come from in the 5 countries I looked at? Samoa, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea and Fiji. Where did they come from? Because even though I don't fully agree that genetics dictates flavour and that's all that matters, genetics do indicate pest and disease tolerance, weather type tolerance. It's very important to do that. And I wanted to find out, where did the beans initially come from in each of the countries? And that's how I became interested in that. Like, for example, in Samoa, contrary to what people may say, the beans came from the other side. They came west. They didn't come from this side and go up. That was a little small thing. But the other part then was, well, all these great big white Boanas walking around with their top hats on and telling you do this and you do that, they knew bugger all about actually growing cocoa. So where did the knowledge come from? And so take Solomon, for example. A lot of Solomon Islanders were used by the Germans because at that stage the Germans had Solomon, were taken up to Samoa, worked in Samoa. Then they brought their knowledge back. Yes, there's a man called Oscar Svensson, a Norwegian, incredibly good. But I don't think he knew a damn thing how to grow the stuff. But he was smart enough to employ islanders who've been over to Samoa to get it. And so, again, you've got this personal relationship type of thing that came in. I was intrigued about the role of Queen Emma.
Yes.
And everybody knows about Queen Emma, and Samoans can take some pride in Queen Emma. She was a clever biddy. When you looked at where she bought her stuff, she liked buying islands.
Yes.
Because if she bought islands, there was no land dispute. And there was a very good bloke who did a lot of work in the Solomon Islands in the early days. Same thing. If he bought land, if he bought a whole island, he wouldn't have problems with people saying, oh, this is my land, this is your land. And land still remains a difficult thing. It's something which is, at the moment, is of great interest in Bougainville. Ever so, and I'll jump ahead, Bougainville had a civil war. At the end of that civil war, in coming back, I say to today, there are 3 different types of ownerships of plantations in Bougainville. Now remember, many of the plantations were abandoned during the Civil War. Only one that I'm aware of was actually ransacked. Yes. And that was because the owner, quite frankly, was a nasty person and he deserved what he got to some extent. But what's happened nowadays is there's a very small percentage, probably no more than about 10, that everybody legally, legitimately accepts is the true ownership. There's another group, about 25, maybe 30%, where customary law, everybody recognises that they are the customary owners of that particular thing. The balance, 70%, is under dispute. Because what happened was, the Germans bought the plantations initially. There was then you had the Civil War. They brought in labourers, and so there were people who were displaced. Then there were the labourers that came in. They weren't always the same people. So now, 70, 80 years later, the people coming back saying, this is our land, great Pappy owned it. No, said we've been here for 60 to 70 years. And so there's a bit of a dispute there. So land is a very important issue. And we need, if you're going to invest in cocoa, you need to get this land type issue leveled out, figured out.
Yeah.
But there's another thing that goes with it, Floris. There is a hypothesis that when there were centralised plantations, the quality was higher because you had centralised systems and you had like centralised drying and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, it was consistent.
Yeah, but now that you've got smallholders, you don't have that same level of consistency. And I've even seen some people debating maybe we should rethink the idea of maybe having a centralised facility. And so again, that comes back to the issue of ownership. Where do we put the land? Who's going to invest money in? We've got to agree upon the land which we put the facility on. So it does get tied up a lot with that cultural time.
And whether or not the government will contribute to that idea.
That's true, but there are also international people, and I've quoted you some examples from Australia into Solomons and into Vanuatu, where the individual chocolate maker has been prepared to invest. Now, they're not putting in $100 million to build something, but they are putting in money, and that is creating goodwill. It's creating a good relationship.
Yes.
So it's not impossible. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
And something could be thought of.
I think there's been some talks of something similar. I've been hearing little bits and pieces here and there down here local. And I think for a lot of I think in the Solomon Islands, when you look at what they've achieved, like they were sort of like secondary to what Samoa, Samoa had the Germans who, built the plantations and so on. And yet the Solomons have kind of overtaken, Samoa in that development says, even, and it's curious to me that they become so great at planting and, the whole cultivating and then the processing of it, and yet didn't develop their own kind of food systems with it. And it's curious to me that over in Samoa, we fully developed the food system and culture around cocoa, and not so much the growing of it, which is kind of crazy. Well, what do you think about that?
I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting because, cocoa Samoa, one of the problems you've got exporting in your country is that your domestic market is so high.
Yes.
You're competing. Remember, I did that study over there at one stage, and I think I came up with the domestic market is something like 400 tonnes.
Yes.
And the price of that is higher than the international, whereas all the other companies, it's upside down. But one thing that needs to be said, though, at least for the Solomon Islanders, one of the, to me, keys to success in the Solomon Islands has been SEMA, the Commodity Export Marketing Authority. And at the moment, Patterson Seliotto is actually managing it. And the reason I say that is twofold, Floris. One of them is he provides a good analysis of the cocoa when it goes on. It's like a quality assurance thing. He'll say if your moisture is high or low, whatever. But more importantly, he provides a level of documentation. The last person to see the cocoa before it gets on the ship, the last person to sign anything is an official from SEMA. And if that SEMA document says, I'll make this up now, that cocoa was 7.3% moisture when it went on the ship, and it gets to Singapore or gets to whatever, and someone says, oh, it's 8.3, they can point to a document from a laboratory which is highly recognised, very recognised. Hang on, darling, it was 7.3 when it left. It's 8.3 when it got there. The problem was not our cocoa, but the shipping. Yeah. And it becomes like a form of quality assurance program in the shipping type of thing. Yeah. And I think the role of SEMA in doing that, in helping the Solomon industry, shouldn't be underplayed. Yes, everybody hates government organisations, documents you fill out, but
we all need them.
When you get this dispute and you can turn to SEMA And Sema can say, with greater, no, it was 7.3% when we put it on the boat.
Yeah.
So any problems?
There's no disputing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it gives you a level of assurance.
Yeah.
So this is a case where we're actually supporting a government institution that actually provides that type of assurance to both the buyer and the seller. And it depends. I can't remember if they do a bean count. I can't remember that. But the main thing is moisture, because that's the one everybody debates over. And I think SEMA's done a wonderful job in trying to do that, to the point that in Bougainville, they're establishing BACRA, Bougainville Agriculture Commodity Regulatory Authority. And that's one of the things they're trying to do, have a laboratory which is recognised, having staff which is recognised as being competent, internationally trained. And so when they say that the beans go on the ship, in Bougainville, it's more risky because there's not many ships that go directly from Bougainville overseas. They normally go up to Lae. Some go up to Rabaul, some go over to Waterford. Most go up to Lae. So you've got multiple handling. So that's where a mistake can occur. But if you've got a document by an authority that says this was the condition of those beans before they got on the ship, it's a good thing for exporters.
Yeah.
So you went ahead with your own culture, but not with the same type of thing. Solomon didn't go ahead the same way, but got something else instead.
Yeah. The role that ICCO plays in all of this, and I don't know where the Pacific fits into, all of that, because some of these processes that are successful in different countries in the region could be very useful if it was shared, if there was some way that it was shared, amongst the Pacific Islands, because I still don't think, it's my own opinion, but I still don't think that enough is being shared in terms of cocoa, processing and shipping and all of this in the Pacific region. It's still very much isolated, each country doing their own thing.
Well, not so much countries, but individuals within there. Now, I'll answer your question in a strange way. When we had the last, before COVID, chocolate festival in Bougainville, I bought 60 or whatever it was kilograms of beans from one grower. I had 4 judges. I gave each of the judges beans from that one grower. Everybody knew who the grower was. There's nothing secret about it. And I told the 4 judges, I want you to produce for me a dark chocolate and a milk chocolate from these beans. I don't care if you use a 20-hour roast or a 1-hour your business. But the one set of beans produced 2 lots of chocolate. So we wound up with 8 chocolates. We got the judges then to pass the chocolates around. There must have been 100 in the room. Everyone got one to try. The growers were absolutely flabbergasted that the one lot of beans could produce such a diverse range of flavors. And the reason I'm saying this is sometimes this is the secret, this is the magic of the chocolate maker. And so maybe the chocolate makers are a little bit reluctant to share that magic, because that's how they make their money.
Yeah.
Did they use a long grind? Did they use a long roasted? Did they get the same temperature quickly and then kept it slow? Or did they come up? All of those tricks that make up what the manufacturers do to make their chocolate. So to some extent, you don't want too much sharing at that secret type level. But what you can do, and this is a suggestion, you introduce an outturn report. And I've done this in some other countries. And that is, everybody who buys the beans, legally and legitimately, is strongly urged to fill out an outturn report. How did the beans actually wind up at the end result? What was their moisture content? What was how did they find all beans are sold on a legally classified, so many slats, so many broken beans, how many, you've got the legal type of thing. How many made that? What was the moisture content? So at least then that knowledge can come back. And that may be something you'd have to disguise the information so it wasn't seen as being commercial. Because if people aren't going to share it commercially, but if they've got faith, let me just pause. Let me come back to the chocolate festival. The way things are going to work out, at one stage, only Grant Vinning will know the name of the producer, the number of the producer, and what grade or what certification the growers gave that, the judges gave that number. Therefore, everyone's got absolute faith that the system is absolutely transparent.
They're tight.
And that's the same. So you need to have some authority which people would be willing to recognise that all the stuff goes in there. I mean, you look at those various reports I send out on the various grindings and that. There are a couple of organisations which are now held to have such honesty that the grinders will happily send them their grinding information. That's when the three grinding things, the associations in America, Europe and Southeast Asia come out. So there's one body there that the grinders feel confident that whatever they send that person will not be disclosed. It'll be amalgamated and aggregated. And so maybe that's something that we could do. Think of somebody that would be, everybody accepts as being neutral and honest. So the information comes in, and then you can get some form of, we're finding it going to Europe that we're exceeding the moisture levels or something like that. Without disclosing the commercial in confidence information.
Absolutely.
I get a lot of good information from the chocolate makers. And you notice that in one case, even in this talk, I haven't told you who the chocolate maker is. And so there has to be respect given to the fact that this is business. If you respect that, then you can get more information. Maybe something that can come out of all of this.
So while we're on the competition, so
yes, ma'am.
as everybody is now aware that we have 6 competitions, 2 of which will involve the Pacific Islands. And what's really important, I would like to hear from you. Why do you think it's important for us to participate in these types of competitions and international?
Unquestionably, I've got a straight answer for that, because you'll get different information than what you get from your first level buyer. Let me take 2 countries I'm very closely aware of, Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea. Normally the first level buyer, he's the local person. All he measures quality by is moisture. Whereas when you get the judges, and I've been adamant, the judges have to report back. The judges can say, we feel that, that you're over fermenting, or you're under fermenting, or you're not drying it enough, or you got too much smoke. And so the growers are getting feedback from the people who actually are putting their money where their mouth is. Now, it mightn't be the same person who buy their beans, but these are chocolate makers, and they're giving you feedback as a professional. What do they think of the cocoa? And there can be no question in Bougainville, where I've got the most data, there's been a marked increase in the quality since we started doing the chocolate festivals. When we had the first lot, there was a huge amount of smoke and things like that. Growers are now getting feedback from the people who spend their money to buy their chocolate, not the first level buyer who really only concerned about moisture level, and when you get to him on Saturday. But they're saying things like, we still think you're doing, these guys can tell you if you're over fermenting or under fermenting. Now, they won't say number 334, you're over fermented. They won't say that, because that's breaking the confidence level. But they will say, on the whole, we feel that you're doing a 7-day ferment, not a 6-day ferment, or you're doing a 5-day ferment, and maybe you should be doing. The drying one's easy. Anyone can tell smoke. There's a little bit between solar and sun. But these guys can tell you if you're over fermenting or you're under fermenting. Did you pick them too? This is their job. That's their factory. That's their laboratory. And so the advantage of entering competitions is that you get this this feedback from professionals that you don't get if you're only just dealing with the stuff locally. And so the more competitions you enter into, the more judges get a chance to say, what they think about your cocoa. And growers respond. There's no question in Bougainville, we've seen a marked increase in the quality because they're getting feedback from the people who matter. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's the answer I was looking for, because obviously it's the same thing that's happening in Samoa, and I'm sure it's also the case in Solomon Islands here. Wonderful. So you've already touched on fermentation and why it's important, and that's part of like the most important bit of work that we need to do in the middle. Can you go a little bit more into fermentation in terms of all the chocolate tasting that you've done overseas over the course of the last, say, 5 to 10 years? Tell me why that is really, really important.
Because it's the fermentation that eventually affects the quality that the chocolate maker has to deal with. Now, the chocolate maker's got some arrows up his sleeve. He can do a different type of a grind. He can do some blending. He can do a different roasting. You know, he can make it a long. As I said, for example, you want a certain temperature in your roasting. You can either get there quickly and hold it, or get there nice and slowly. It all makes a big difference. At the end of the day, these guys, in a way, are using their skill to fix up a problem which is in the fermentation. And so the fermentation is where it really matters. And just trust me on this one, Floris. There's a lot of different people with views on fermentation. Let me just give you an example from my history study. The biggest cocoa grower in the whole of Bougainville was Numa Numa Plantation, and that was famous. They used to make a chocolate called After Dinner, and it was sold to an English company, and this was the only place they got their cocoa was from Numa Numa to make that. And I know people of my age, when I mentioned that chocolate, they all recognised what it was. In this bloke's factory or in his fermentation, if any grower or any worker in the factory cleaned the sides of the wood and got rid of all the yeast, he was sacked on the spot. But also, the holes underneath, at the bottom of your fermentation box, you've got the holes. If they were clogged up, you were also sacked on the spot. So this is how, because this is how much they appreciated the role of fermentation. Now, different buyers also have different requirements. There are actually some buyers out there that like a slightly smoky chocolate. They think it, or cocoa, they think it makes a slightly different tasting chocolate. But this is where the judging becomes important. I can tell you overall about the fermentation. It's the fermentation which starts off the whole flavour thing to buy. This is why, I hope no one's listening, this is why I think a lot of coffee people are a bit strange. Today our special is Ethiopian beans or Kenyan beans or something. It's not where the beans come from. It's what the roaster does.
Yeah, exactly.
A roaster can ruin whatever beans you got.
Yeah, exactly.
We're doing Ethiopian and a Moroccan rubbish. In that case, so you don't have fermentation is not as critical in coffee as what it is in cocoa.
Yeah.
But therefore the roast is important. But I think the fermentation, that's where the flavour actually really gets going. And that's that to me is the most. Yes, genetics comes into that, but only if the fermentation is good. It's the same with the drying. You can use fire or fuel-based drying type of thing. And in fact, in the Pacific, there was a German who worked in Samoa called Hufnagel, who seemed to have been one of the first people ever to have done forced air drying of cocoa. And he got this because he was doing the forced air drying of copra. And he used the same type of technique. You can do it safely, but there are certain rules you must apply. For example, don't have a 44-gallon drum for your main thing. Have something with a much thicker steel. Have a pipe. You can have a chimney, but make sure the chimney goes meters above the shed so the smoke doesn't get trapped there. So you can go, I'm not saying don't use fuel. That's a mythology, because in many of the places you got no choice. Yes, solar and sun would be better. But you can do a fuel-based drying, but there are certain rules, as I said. Make sure you keep turning the beans over when they're drying, nice and clearly. Do it more frequently. Again, coming back to the fermentation, one of the things we've got, and this is a small hint, I found a bloke up in Toowoomba who makes about 1.5 metre temperature gauge. And what we did was, we put tape around the steel, like a 30, 60 and 90 centimetre thing. And we could put that down till we had the tape to show we're at 30 centimetres off the bottom. And we could read the temperature there. And we could read the temperature at 60. So we had a very close idea. Oh, it's just simple. It's just, it's basically a big, great long thermometer where the key thing is the thing down the bottom. The temperature thing is held over at a point over here. And you can move it up and down your load to find out what your temperature is going inside. It's the temperature which is critical for that fermentation. And that's what, but some people, Floris, there's a debate. Do you ferment for 2 days, don't touch it, don't do anything. And then after that, you do a daily turn. Or do you do turn on the first day and turn every second day? I mean, there is some research. The other thing is the mucilage around the bean at the beginning of the season is different to the same level of mucilage around the bean at the end of the season. So do you use the same timing for fermentation at the beginning of the season as what you need at the end of the season? It's just, don't do what don't do what Dad did. You know, like your buyer should be able to tell you what type of fermentation he likes. And so that way you can relate the fermentation to what the buyer makes. Now, if he's got a good product, it's easy for him to make a good chocolate out of it. But different chocolate makers, you know, they want a strong chocolate, not so strong chocolate, some like the sweet. That's let them do that. But let them start with a decent set of beans to start with.
Exactly. So while you're on that, just quickly, there is out there in the marketplace a claim for raw beans and raw chocolate. So it's always problematic to me because I understand fermentation renders the bean no longer raw because it kills the embryo and then it goes up to temperatures past 46 degrees. So I have somehow a problem with that. And I'm sure some other, you know, chocolate makers and producers feel the same because there's a lot of claim that there's, you know, all this raw chocolate around in the retail place at the moment. So how is that? How is that possible?
I met a chocolate maker down in Melbourne who produces raw bean chocolate. And the only way I can describe him, Floris, he's a barefoot millionaire. I went out to his factory. I was staggered at the size of it. This was no hippie, I can tell you. This was a really, this was a hard-nosed businessman, but who happened to believe in raw cocoa. And in fact, I've actually got a packet of his chocolate powder at the moment, which I have in the mornings, and it's made from raw beans. And so even though this guy has, when I met him at one stage, he came in on his bicycle. We had to meet somewhere out near the Melbourne airport, so he cycled in. There's this image of a hippie, but he's a very strong business. But the thing I liked about him, I admired him greatly, was he's also ethical. And he's dealing with a couple of places in Africa where he supports the whole village. You know, he puts in water systems, he's helping with the schooling and that. So he's hard-nosed businessman, but he's also quite ethical. He makes money out of raw chocolate. And so if he can make money out of raw chocolate, it's not a myth. I've been to his factory. It's ginormous. Not just, sorry, I better rephrase it. He doesn't just produce chocolate cake products, the whole series of products that he has. But this wasn't a factory of a bloke working at a mum and dad's garage. You know, this was really a serious thing. So yes, there is a market for that. And I think what we're seeing increasingly is people are becoming concerned about the origin of their product. And I think we are seeing this is not just the cafe latte people that, you know, that want to get their cocoa born from the north side of the river on a picked by a pregnant 97-year-old one-legged grandmother type of thing. These are people who really, you know, who are willing to pay. And so the two issues here are environmental sustainability, and if they can identify with that, they will buy that cocoa. And the other one is worker welfare. Now, these are a long way away from breed, from variety, from fermentation, but these are some of the characteristics which are now becoming important to a lot of chocolate buyers. Not that these are the main market people, because at the end of the day, more chocolate goes into making chocolate biscuits or putting into chocolate, a chocolate cake mix. You know, the bar market is half a bugger all type of thing. That's nothing. You know, like that's the top part of it. But they are willing to pay a high price, and that's important. So even though I tend to find the raw stuff a little bit tad bitter for me personally, but that's me personally. And if people are buying it and willing to put their money where their good citizenship heart lies, then good, go for it. I'm not against it.
The coco Samoa that they produce today is actually made from raw beans, which is straight from the tree, from the pod. So what they do is they just roast straight from the pods and then pound it. It never used to be done in that way. So it was fermenting before. So I'm not, the only reason why I see that happening is time. It takes less time for them to process.
No. Indonesia produces two types of beans. One is the unfermented bean, the other one is the fermented bean. The fermented beans nearly always win prizes. They're very good beans. But the bulk of the beans are not fermented. They're picked, dried, and chipped. Now, this was it was a time thing, yes, but also was a risk strategy. You reduce the amount of risk, and also it's an allocation of growers' time. Yes. A lot of these growers have other products. Now, yes, beans were important to them, but it wasn't their centre of their life. That they could afford to adopt everything. So they put it to some side. When you're driving parts of, I remember in Indonesia, when we went up to Sulawesi along the road, you've got to be very careful because the beans are spread right across the road because the roads are bitumen. And so you've got, a good place to drive the bean. But also, that's also a challenge because if they're not aerated, you can get salmonella.
Yes.
And so even though you leave it on the road, you've got at least every day, turn it over, rake it, keep it going, a few things like that. So it's not just, it's a timing thing, yes, but it's also related to risk and the growers' labour available to do the process.
We're winding it up now, but I just wanted to touch on this because, with the work that you've done in the Pacific and with all the inspiration that you've seen all around the world working with cacao and cocoa, and you've been involved in some of these shows around in the Pacific. You've actually been the instigator of some of these shows, and we're doing this for the first time with New Zealand, Aotearoa, and Samoa, and we're inviting the rest of the Pacific to come with us. So what do you think would be the best thing that could come out that we should aim for to come out of this show, if anything?
Oh, simple. A recognition that the Pacific as a whole produces damn good cocoa.
Absolutely.
Simple. You think Solomon Islands won gold a couple of years ago, and New Guinea won through Bougainville won gold. This lifts our profile. We're fighting it. We've got 50,000 tonnes maximum versus 4 million tonnes over there.
Yes.
But anything we can do to raise our profile, and I think that is a desirable. Whether Vanuatu gets it or Samoa gets it, to me, it's not important. Lift the profile. A rising tide lifts all boats.
That's good. That's a really good note to end on. Look, I would love to speak all day about this, and it's a topic that both you and I are very, very passionate about and work very much in depth in, and we hope to support so many more people. I'm grateful that I've been able to continue doing this work in many different facets since the beginning, and just from coming out of nowhere and then just landing on my feet on my ancestors' land, and really just having an understanding of how labor intensive this whole cocoa farming business is, and the dreams that my ancestors might have had, in terms of they exported before, but they never got to the stage where we'd be able to do more and support more people in our village and everyone. So I am deeply grateful for that, and we hope to have more conversations on this Cacao Conversations podcast. Thank you so much for your time,